Hello and welcome to Scholars Hub at Home. My name is Allison Gampel and I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Programs here at York University. Thank you so much for joining us here today for today's lecture. It is titled A Radical Proposal to Solve the Housing Crisis, as you know, with Alexander Vesna, a grad of York with both a bachelor and master in disaster and emergency management and a faculty member in our disaster and emergency management program. I accept the responsibility to acknowledge the land I'm on. Because we're not all gathered in the same place, the land I'm about to acknowledge might not be for the territory you're on. Please take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you are on. The website nativeland.ca is a good resource for this. As a member of the York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of the university. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Tkaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Before we introduce our speaker today, I'm very excited to tell you that York University is recognized among the world's top 40 universities in the 2023 Times Higher Education Impact Rankings, specifically for our commitment towards advancing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Now, before we begin, we like to conduct a quick poll. So the question is, how would you rate your knowledge regarding the topic of today's presentation? The poll should pop up on your screen. There it is. I'll give everyone a moment to respond. Great, thank you. It's helpful for our speakers to know more about who's in our audience and their level of knowledge. Many of us are quite familiar with Zoom at this point, but if you need any help, please feel free to click on the Q&A button that's at the bottom of your screen, and we have a team that's ready to help you. That same Q&A button can be used to submit questions for our guest speaker to answer during the Q&A period. Please note that all of your questions and comments are visible to our panelists and staff working behind the scenes, so please keep your comments relevant and respectful. Today, we're doing a slightly different format than what we usually do, where I will be interviewing our guest, and we will follow that by a Q&A portion where your questions can be answered. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Alexander Vesna. Alex is the CEO of Prepared Canada Corporation and teaches business continuity in the Disaster and Emergency Management undergraduate and master's program at York University. He has designed and executed continuity programs for organizations spanning more than 20 industries. These organizations range from sole proprietorships to multinational corporations to government institutions. Alex has over 100 articles published by Postmedia relating to continuity, disaster management, public safety, and risk. We are so pleased that you could be with us here today. Alex, welcome. Feel free to turn on your camera and we'll begin our conversation.
Hey, everybody.
All right, so let's kick it off. If you can just start by please explaining to us your radical proposal to solve the Canadian housing crisis.
Okay, so we're gonna add in a lot of context here, and I don't teach this proposal to students because for a variety of reasons. I'm not big on teaching science and process and getting into specifically my core competency areas. But one thing I do teach to students is the importance of really being clear with your limitations, where things came from, and using context. You know, you can use snowball sampling, that's fine, but tell me you're doing it. So, you know, just being honest with your limitations. So this idea is the byproduct of a specific process that some of the best ideas come from, which is the things you think up in the shower. So you have an idea, you think of it in the shower, and unlike just throwing the idea out there, When I came up with this idea, and I don't know if maybe subconsciously someone else thought of it, and then I, came up with it again in the shower, but I don't remember anybody else thinking up with this, so that's where it came up. What I initially, my response to this was, "There's no way this can work. There's no." And then I thought about it some more, and I went, I'm not seeing many issues with this really when you dive down into it. For some stepping back a bit, in continuity of operations and in emergency management and my core competency area, largely what I do every day is I look at a massive system and I see it fail, or I try to engineer a way that it can fail so that can be reverse engineered and the system can be fixed. When you're looking at vulnerable populations, when you're looking at the way a hurricane decimates an area, when you're looking at the way some of the mechanics of terrorism, when you're looking at disasters, you're really looking at a large system that has a bunch of parts that were built in that fails in a specific way, and you're looking at reverse engineering that. So I'm a large systems thinker by profession, just to put them there. I am not a city manager, and I am not an expert in real estate. So just putting that out there, I'm a systems thinker. So I had this idea, and I decided, you know what? This is maybe worth making a few phone calls. So I called some people who are economists, very well-known experts in real estate, people that contacts and relationships I've built over the years, people that's opinions I respect. And they had the same kind of thing that I had. Initially, they told me I was out of my mind. There's no way that this would work. And then a day later, in every single case, they called me back and they said, "You're brilliant." One of them actually said that this could be a solution for housing around the world. And I said, "That's a pretty grandiose statement. You might want to check that. I don't think we're claiming that." But the point is that this is the type of idea where the initial response with most people I have found personally is, "There's no way. There's just no way." And then you think on it, and then its problems just keep being solved, and concerns you had, suddenly you don't need to make many changes in the system, and it just accounts for it. So it's a simple proposal with some very complex implications. Okay, a lot of caveating, great. So the basic idea, there's three main components to this idea. Now, for people thinking about the housing crisis is often separated into demand and supply side issues. I would generally agree that we have a significant supply issue, and this proposal is more demand leaning. However, it does have effect on supply. So just keep that in mind. There are three main components. Component number one, you remove rent entirely from the residential market. So you essentially make rent illegal. Rent is gone. Now, you can't just do that. You have to replace that with something. The idea would be that you would replace that with a stipend given to the landowner or the homeowner for the number of residents that are residing on the property on a per resident basis. So I'm going to throw a number out here, but this is not the number. What the number actually is a really important discussion that has to be had. Let's say you give people $500 a month per resident that lives on the property, and there's 5 people on the property. The homeowner or the landowner gets $2,500 a month because they're housing 5 people. You've essentially quantified the value of providing the service of housing an individual in your country. Now, a critical part of this is the money is not being given to the resident. The money is being given directly to the landowner. Now, the only way that you can regulate and control this is if the government oversees the whole thing. So I'm just going to get that out right there. This is having the government essentially pay everybody's rent. Now, you can't just do that, because what you're essentially would be doing is subsidizing rent for everyone, and the market would have issues. And the original idea behind this isn't really just to pay everybody's rent. It's to allow market forces in the capitalist system to push everyone towards a race to the top instead of a race to the bottom. So how do you adjust that? You make the number set and the same in every single jurisdiction. So it is the same number to house one individual in Toronto as it is to house one individual in Iqaluit, as it is to house one individual in Calgary, as it is to house one individual in Oshawa, as in wherever. You have a set value. You are placing a value on housing an individual, and you are paying people who house those people for providing the service. So what your housing is essentially service provision, which it already is, but we're kind of getting around it. It is, but it's not treated that way. I would argue in many ways. The other thing you've effectively done is you've decoupled living cost from speculation and housing valuation. So your houses can be worth whatever, it doesn't matter. Well, it matters, but it matters less so because the rents they don't exist, they're stabilized. You set a value at how much it costs to house people. So there's three things with this number that are really important. So once again, first thing, rent's illegal. Second thing, you have a monthly stipend. You're rewarding a landowner for the number of people who are, housed on the land. Third thing, you have to make sure that there's specific things with the number. The first thing is, once again, it has to be the same everywhere. The second, it has to be high enough to incentivize the landowners to participate in the system. And that's the second thing. And then the third thing, it has to be low enough that you don't bankrupt the country, which is pretty important. Now, if there is no magic number, the entire model falls apart. So you don't just flippantly do this and throw your hands up in the air and say, okay, we're fixing everything. And my ask on this topic is not to just start implementing tomorrow. It's to have a conversation and to think and then see if it works. And if it doesn't work, that's fine. If there's parts of it that we like and those work, great. But it's thinking. And you don't need a lot of time to do thinking on stuff like this with a lot of the experts that are very, very motivated in this space. It's kind of interesting that way. Now, and I've found when exploring this idea, people initially, once again, get that whoa. And when you start working through some of the questions and things people have, you start kind of to see the bigger picture. It's the type of thing that you just got to like sit a little and see how it implements out. Now, one thing I just want to talk about before we get into the questions, this idea is predicated upon the idea of the indivisible hand of the market. It is predicated upon this idea. Because individuals are not paying rent, and because everywhere has the same rental cost effectively of zero, everyone can move whenever they want. So if you are living in an accommodation where the building owner has no heating and air conditioning, and you're at risk of dying of heat stroke in the summer, you leave. New buildings, development is incentivized to take your customers because everyone has maximum market mobility. It is critical that it is still profitable for the developers, otherwise they won't build. But so long as it is, if you don't like it, you leave. So you don't need as much complicated stuff because people simply move. Right now, some people argue that, yes, you can move if you talk to people who are vulnerable, who know how the world really works. It is not practical to tell people just move in the real world. So the big play here is about focusing on maximum market mobility of the resident, making it so they're as free as possible to move. Now, look, this can very much result in landowners trying to put 14 people in a one-bedroom apartment. They're going to try to do that. But the only way that is going to happen is if those 14 people want to live together in that one-bedroom apartment, because they will simply leave and go somewhere else. And it is, in a free market system, it is near impossible for every person with every location, with every residence to collude together. They're going to try to compete and eat each other's lunch. That's how business works. And this is, once again, really focused on the landowners are business people. The residents have maximum market mobility, and you're removing the middle person and just paying the business person. So it's an interesting angle there. So you may have a few questions going off that. So how are we doing so far?
Oh my gosh, I don't know where to start. I mean,
Yeah,
the first thought crossing my mind is, wow, I wish I had as productive showers as you clearly do to think out these big ideas.
It's not every shower. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, totally wild.
It's out there.
And so let's start by asking, how could we pay for this, right? It sounds pretty expensive.
Yeah, that was one of the first things that I came, the first issues, right? And you get a lot of the same, questions and concerns that you get from universal basic income proposals, guaranteed annual income proposals, things like that. And it's different though. So on the money question, right? Effectively, that's what this is. First of all, don't um, don't combine it with the universal basic income or guaranteed annual income style proposals the same way, because those proposals argue for increasing the income of the impoverished or of the vulnerable, or of, in this case, well, this is applying to all residents, but still it's focusing on the spender, not on the business owner. So this plan isn't about, or proposal isn't about giving people more money, it's about lowering their expense. So you don't have the same disincentivization of labor problems, because you're not disincentivizing labor. You still have to pay for food, you still have to pay for entertainment. I'm not giving you money, I'm just making it so you don't have to spend as much. So on that one thing there, because it affects the rest of it. Now, when you solve housing, when people have houses, when shelter has been accounted for, there are a huge number of expenses that drastically decrease. Your social services expenses decrease significantly. You don't have to worry about a large number of expenses that occur when people are freezing on the street. When people don't have to worry about being homeless, your mental health expenses go down dramatically. When people don't have the stress of am I going to be homeless, spousal abuse goes down. Like, when you think about all of the different stresses in the day-to-day life that are affected by, oh no, I'm going to be homeless in a week, and you eliminate it from society entirely, there are savings everywhere. So that's the one side of the argument. And now, once again, I'm not giving you the exact numbers here, but this is the byproduct of me having a quite animated conversation with several economists I respect a lot, that know a lot more about this, the economics of this, than I do. But when they come back and they say, no, actually, I think you can make money, I go, ooh, okay. So that's one part. The second part is we have incredible costs associated in our healthcare system with frequent flyers, with people who are frankly they have very they're not avoidable, but they have mitigatable health consequences that, had they had, I'm going to say reasonable living, and we have to define reasonable, right? But I'm just going to kind of throw this out there and allow everyone to fill in the blanks. Reasonable living accommodations, you would have significantly lower healthcare costs from those individuals. When you consider that, I believe the number is 80%, but I have to check it, of our total healthcare expenditure is in the last 6 months of life, and how much those last 6 months of life can be impacted by, I'm going to say, unfortunate housing circumstances. You start finding money. I'm going to be very general there, and which is not normally what I would do with students or an academic paper, but this is, a shower idea. So here we go. So there's that. There is also, very interestingly, a huge amount of money that can be saved on bureaucracy, because all these programs you don't have to run anymore. You have a whole bunch, there's huge programs that you can just roll into it as a cost, because you have a bunch of programs that are paying people that effectively they're just throwing into housing, and it doesn't even cover it, but you don't need them anymore. So there's a thing there that you can do. And when you start adding all of the costs in, it gets interesting. Now, on the other side of this, because what if you raise taxes, right? Like, what if you have to raise taxes, which is a question that comes up. Okay, fair enough. When you are removing the expenditure from people's budgets, which for most Canadians accounts to more than 50% of their total gross income, you can increase your income tax by 30% and still more than quadruple your disposable income. For many people, you're going to be increasing their disposable income by an order of magnitude, by at least a factor of 10, even if you increase their income tax by 40%. Like, you have an incredible amount of money that you can access from people simply because you have removed the expenditure entirely. And unlike the systems with rent and with housing expenditure that we have right now, income tax scales. With rent, it can go above your total income, and there's just nothing you can do. So there are interesting arguments that can be made, more conservative leaning, flat tax arguments for actually reducing the total tax burden on the very wealthy, but fixing some issues with how the tax system is operated, and actually increasing the total revenue from tax, because you're removing the burden from people's budgets entirely. I'm not going to get into that because that gets fairly political and things get interesting. But the point is, when you can actually make an argument for a program like this, where you actually cost the rich less money in tax, that is very interesting. I'm not saying we do that, but when you can even make that proposal, then things start getting very academically interesting. So there's a lot of play in this. I'm not going to, and that wasn't an exact answer for just do this, but the situation's too complicated for just do this.
Got it. Got it. So just, the question that's coming to mind is, is there enough housing to support our population?
Yeah, that's a good question. Now, when I look at things like the vacancy rate, when you look at vacancy rates, they actually, and how they're tabulated, vacancy rates don't actually include Airbnbs. So if an Airbnb exists, it's not vacant. And there's a lot of Airbnbs. And if you have a mansion with 2 people in it, it's not vacant, but it's not being used very well. So there is an incredible amount of square footage in this country that is not being used, that already exists. And and once again, the idea is not that you pay a landowner for every resident that would have otherwise rented to them. It's that you pay them for every person that is on the property, period. So if you own the home and you have a family of 4, the government gives you, if it's $500, we'll make it 1,000, it's a rounded number. If it's $1,000 per person, the government is giving you $4,000 a month for housing your family and yourself. You're setting a value that is the same in all cases for this. If you are someone who works in a private sector position, does not have a pension, and you saved your whole everything towards buying property, and your house is your pension. Well, now it actually is, except it's paying you, right? So no, but it is directly paying you now. You're setting a value on housing individuals, right? So there's that piece. I apologize. I went off on a complete tangent and I completely forgot your question. What was the question?
Yeah, no, that's okay. It's all very interesting. I was asking about,
Yeah.
is there enough space? Are there enough dwellings to house our Canadian population? Let's say we went Canada wide. I think you did answer that. No.
There's
not very excited personally about living in a mansion, so.
No, this is the important thing, though. This is the important thing. I had multiple conversations with individuals who live in mansions who said, well, I'm not going to house, 11 people in my mansion that can fit, 30. That would be ridiculous. I don't need the money. And I said, you're not going to get $11,000 a month. You're going to leave that on the table. You and I have a fundamental disagreement on human greed. No. Are you telling me that someone has a large house, they're living alone, and they don't want to rent out the basement that they can retrofit for how much money? You have to make sure the number is high enough to incentivize it. This is part of the first 3 things I was talking about. But if it is high enough, room will be found. The problem that you're going to have is, one, you have to make sure that people don't start doing things against fire code and building permits, because that's important. If you're in a basement, you have to have a walk up, you have to have multiple egresses, or you can't be trapped in a fire, right? And there's going to be some market mobility initially, and there's also the phase-in part. But no, there is more room in most of these houses than people realize. Also, on the business owner thing, if the government is effectively paying you directly, the rent is guaranteed. If you have a landlord-tenant disagreement, the check is still coming in. So it becomes much more attractive. It's lower risk to get involved in housing residents when the money is guaranteed. So I think that room will be found simply through human greed and business entrepreneurship.
Right. So let's talk problem tenants. I'm imagining my mansion, and tenants that think it's a big old party. How do you manage a problem? What do you do?
Okay, so and actually, I think the best answer to this question is by throwing another question back at it, because I think that this exemplifies the issue. What do you do now if you have a problem tenant that is depreciating the value of your property, but they always pay their rent on time? Because that's the problem you effectively have, because their rent is being paid now. Because normally the problem you have is you have a problem tenant that's depreciating the value of your property, and then they decide to not pay their rent, and then they decide to sit in there for a year while the Landlord Tenant Act or the Landlord Tenant Board decides to figure it out somehow because they're backlogged. But you don't have that problem now. You're getting paid. This does two things. The first is it changes the dynamic because depreciating the value of your property is still very relevant. There's no question. And when you're talking about people partying in your residence, you care that they don't clean up and that the wall got smashed and you have to repair it, and that's a value problem. If they actually cleaned up, you probably wouldn't care. Most landlords will. If the value of the house increased, even though they partied every day, the value of your house increased. So let's talk about exactly what the concern here is. The other thing that's really interesting here is that means that the landlord tenant boards aren't dealing with any disagreements on rent. That doesn't exist anymore. They can become completely focused on property devaluation. They don't have multiple different, that's it, because you've removed one of the conflicts entirely. They're gone. So and anyone who works with multiple systems and processes, et cetera, and works in a professional environment where you have to do 15 different things, if you have one thing that's like half your job that is a huge mental load and you take that out, you get really good at the other 14 things. So like and once again, I'm speaking very casually here and just kind of throwing it out there with, without citations, with more just kind of common sense logic, but like just get an idea where this is kind of coming from. So what are your thoughts on that?
Listen, it's fascinating. It's blowing my mind. And like you said, it will probably make a lot more sense tomorrow. So I'm banking on that because, yeah, it's, the initial response is, as you said, how could this be possible? But maybe it is. So, I'm thinking about the government and, the government, how they would track such a system. I mean, it sounds super overwhelming. I mean, though they do a lot of overwhelming things. Tell me about your thoughts on that.
Okay, so I actually got a lot of questions on this. Well, are you not going to just create a giant bureaucracy and we can't afford this and et cetera, and how would this be possible? You're not paying the residents. This is critical. If you own a home, you're a business owner. You're already in government systems. You're already trackable. You have a direct deposit account. You can be paid, right? Like it is, and I'm going to tie this back to a disaster here because I think that this is important for context. When you're dealing with a business owner, there are certain things within the system that they have to be a business owner, which allows you to access them more easily as a government in terms of just communication and sending things. When you're dealing with everybody in the public, this includes the highly vulnerable. We're going to take a journey to the past, to Hurricane Katrina for the moment. Hurricane Katrina happened at the end of the month. Social Security comes in on the first of the month. They didn't make the buses free. This is a vulnerable population where they have no money at the end of the month. They do not have $3. You can't send them money reliably and efficiently and easily because you're dealing with a vulnerable population. And by definition, if you are giving money to the entire population, you are now giving money to a vulnerable population because they're part of the entire population. If you're giving money to the business owner, this is a specific demographic within the population, which is used to financial transactions, that is used to doing this type of handshake. I mean, like digital handshake. So it's easier to set that up on that side. That's one thing. The other thing is you need to have something that the resident can essentially sell to the landowner in effect. And what they're selling is their address. You have a driver's license, you have a government ID, you have a designated Canada Post drop-off location. That is what you're selling. All you're doing is essentially marrying the two systems between the government's ability to operate with a business and the Canada Post ID. So if you are a potential resident, you are selling to the prospective landowner that you will set the designated address in your own government files, which you have, to their address, which will result in them receiving a direct deposit. You can automate almost all of this. you have to have some oversight and some quality control and make sure that people aren't scamming the system, which it will get scammed with a certain percentage because every system gets scammed. But what's new about that? So, but you have to have some level of oversight. But most of this already exists. You already have a postal code. You already have an address. You already have a designated residence. They already have bank accounts. This is all automatable. So there's that one. That one's fun. There's a few ways to do it, but that's some version of that basically is what I keep coming down to.
Okay, got it. Oh my gosh, so interesting. We have a number of questions coming in from the audience, so I'm going to park mine to the side and turn it over to our audience, and I'll read some questions coming out. So the first question I'd like to ask is, who qualifies? Every Canadian? This is kind of a long one. So who qualifies? Every Canadian?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's actually a really good question. And I've been working with a few, and sorry I cut you off, but I know exactly where that goes. So I've been working with multiple special interest groups, communities that work on helping bring students into the country that are international students, and the housing of them is a huge concern. And especially with some of the more things that have happened recently in the news, that's actually a really, really interesting question. And I thought about this a bit. We would actually have to think about how we would handle that. That's a serious question. Some people would argue for only citizens, but that's not practical because then you've essentially created a two-tier system market and you can't house anybody. My view on this is you want to essentially remove residential rent from the system entirely. So you would have everyone who is legally here qualify. Now, the good thing about creating a system where you're tracking all these people is now you can track people. Now, you already are tracking people, but now you're doing it in a more automated way where there's financial incentive. So people who are not legally here have a problem, but they kind of already had a problem. And this gets complicated because when you talk about people who are not legally in a country, things get complicated. But I would say, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because I can teach an entire course on that and it gets very complex. However, I think you could apply this to the population of the country effectively. So take the population of Canada, 40 million, multiply it by the number that is given to the people per month, multiply it by the number of months in the year, add on some admin, that's the cost of the program. It's probably $1/3 of $1 trillion per year. But when you're solving housing, you can spend a lot of money. So, that's something the economist said to me, which I was like, whoa, okay, fair enough. So I would say everyone that is legally here would be how you couldn't practically, because if you applied it to people who weren't legally here, then the government would have to be paying for them to, like, I don't see how that's kind of complicated. They'd have to register them as living here, but they're not registered as living here. So that seems complicated. But other than that, everybody.
Right. So the second part of that audience question was about, is this geared towards lower income people?
No,
or
entire population. If you're a billionaire, you get paid $1,000 a month to house yourself. I don't care. Everybody. Because you need to level the playing field and wipe the entire system. And there's a really important reason for this. This allows an entrepreneur to leverage the value of their house and risk it all and then not go homeless. This is critically important for small business investment. This means that your house is an investment. It is a commodity. It is something that you can leverage. It is not, if I lose this, I am homeless. This is a huge deal for small business and entrepreneurship. The fact that you do not have to worry about that. So no, everybody qualifies. No, everybody, and it's simpler, it's cleaner. You don't have to do this thing where you're kind of subsidizing this, but kind of not subsidizing this. And then they charge $5,000 a month in rent anyways, but then they get a ticket from the government because you didn't make it illegal and it's sticky. Okay, nah, wipe it all. Simple, easy. Everybody understands it. Simple, easier to administer. Sorry, this is a byproduct of disaster management. When things get too complicated, people die. Okay, like it's just like, and like you simplify things because you are bleeding. Put pressure on it, figure it out. Okay, there's a time and a place for complex, and when you're in a crisis, this is just my bias. Okay, you just simple.
So fundamentally, we're trying to come up with radical ideas to keep people alive. I love it. I love it.
Well, yeah, that's the core competency of disaster management. Well, not the radical ideas part, but the, the with people alive. And sometimes, the ideas you come up with can sound pretty radical because you're dealing with disasters, right? This is the bias, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So the next question coming in from the audience is sort of having to deal with, we've talked about a number of stakeholders in this idea. So let's talk about homeowners, right? The question coming in is, would this disincentivize ownership? Why would I own a house if my rent, if I could live for free?
If you wanted to invest, you would only own a house if you wanted to invest in something and you wanted to basically have an alternate to your RRSP or your TFSA. If you wanted to have a lower risk investment vector than investing in stocks. It's the same reason why people invest in real estate now. It's, you're creating a pension for yourself, basically, as it were, that type of idea. That's the main reason. The second reason would be, and this is just the reality of what would happen in a system like this. If you own the property, you can dictate the agreement of the people living within the property. And if you want to have a mansion and not have 15 people in it, if you own it, you can choose to do that and then not collect the revenue you would have generated had you chosen to house people. If you are in the rent system, you're in a competing high mobility market. You might not be able to find a mansion to live in because there might be a group of 20 people in a college who decide, we're 20 people, you're 10, we'll live in a party house. You need us to keep it clean, but we can live in the mansion. Well, we're going to double the amount that you collect a month. So like everyone's negotiating. If you don't want to be in the negotiation sphere with everybody else competing, then you might want to buy. So you still have those types of tiers of living, but you don't have people like, and this dovetails into a different question that I get pretty frequently. I'm a homeowner. I don't want to house homeless people. Then don't, but someone will, because it's money, right? So it's about what part of the system you want to be in. And I think that if you're somebody that has, a good track record of, you respect the property, you are someone who probably increases the value of the house that you live in, or you don't decrease the value very rapidly. There's someone's going to make an app for this for people, for the Yelp reviews on how good of a tenant you are. It's just going to happen. So if you have that type of track record, you probably have a better negotiating position to get into a house, but that already exists today. Like we already do that. We just don't focus on that as much. We also focus on the money, but we already have that. So you don't want to be in that system, you buy the house, right? So do you want to be in the position of power where you can do that? Sure. If you want to be in the position of, well, I'm moving, well, then you move. But at least you're not homeless. And at least you have a disposable income.
Right. Interesting. So, I as an extrovert, I can just, bring people into my house, know that I'm actually going to get paid because their rent will be met, and then I, don't have to work anymore. So
yeah, well, you still have to sign. Still have to sign some sort of agreement. Like it's not like they're in the house now, hooray! Like so, like you could, like if you wanted to house a bunch of people, then sure, then you create a listing of that, and you want to do that, and you want to try to fit one more in. If all the people in the house aren't okay with that, then you have a negotiation problem. But you already have that problem right now. So
right.
yeah.
So then, what happens with the labor market? What's the incentive to work if if I can be a homeowner and make money without having to go into the office, or B, if my living costs are so low that we don't need to work, then do we run into a problem that there's not enough labor to do what we need for our economy and living?
Yeah, once again, you can remove a whole bunch of social programs, and people still have to eat, and people still want to watch television. And I mean, you can steal a lot of media from the internet, and I'm sure many people are very educated on that, but at some point you might need to pay for the internet. So like you still have expenses. You just don't have this giant expense that is looming over you and dictating your entire life, as many people have said to me it feels like. So I mean, you still have to work. Now, does this mean that some people might say, you know what, I don't want to do this, I'd rather do this? Yeah. Does that mean that some people might take a job that's closer to their home and then spend less time on, the 400 series highways? That sounds like an improvement to transit infrastructure to me. So now the solution is improving transit. So like if people are trying to get closer towards what is more efficient for society, Canada produces more stuff, which means GDP improves. If GDP improves, we have more money. And that is an extreme simplification. But in fact, I can hear now my economist friend getting mad at me for the way I described that. But in in general, that's the kind of idea here from like an ideological level. People will still have to work. Like if you worked 30 hours a week in a job that you actually liked and you made half of what you made now, but you still had similar disposable income, would you maybe work harder at the job? Would you maybe pick up volunteering somewhere and do something else out of sense of purpose where you're creating goods or services for the country for free now? So now I'm getting your labor for free. I like free labor. Free labor is nice. Right. So it's just, you know, there's things. And unlike the GAI and UBI argument or a social assistance argument where they give you $5,000 a year, and if you work, you know, for $500, they deduct it, so your work is worth nothing, right? Where they disincentivize labor. This does not do that. You pay the landowner directly and you make what you make and you can buy what you can buy, but you don't have to buy a roof. So it does not disincentivize labor. I disagree.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay, I can see it. And you know, as you said that, you know, I'm thinking, you know, I love my job, right? I get to speak to people like you and our other, you know, fantastic thinkers from the university. It's you know, there are jobs that you would still want to do even if you had extra money to spend on vacation.
Yeah, but yeah, I was gonna say, but if you had extra money, you know, maybe you might say, you know, maybe I'll go do this now. Because look, you're not going to save the money and put it in a bank account and have it sit forever because you don't have to worry about being homeless. So you're going to spend it. And if the money's moving the economy, you don't care. You're buying more stuff. So some business is now benefiting from the fact that you are now blasting more money into the market. The problem is what's known as the problem often with a lot of financial things is a concept known as is dead money that ends up basically in a bank account in the middle of nowhere that's just sat on forever and never gets spent. Right. But if this is why I'm just tangent time because it's fun. One of the main arguments for a UBI or universal basic income guaranteed annual income style system, which this is not that, but just it comes up. One of the main arguments for it is if you give poor people a bunch of money, it doesn't matter because they blast it into the market anyways. Right, like that's one of the classic arguments that's given. So as long as you're not disincentivizing labor, if someone's still going to work 40 hours a week, you can give them whatever money you want. It doesn't matter. They're just going to buy stuff. So like that's not exactly true because you can't do that infinitely because you run into a supply issue because demand goes into basically infinite. But in principle, there isn't much risk giving you more disposable income because I assume you don't make $4 billion a year. Right. So, I mean, you know, well, you know, neither do I, but like you're probably going to spend it. There's worse things that can happen than someone spending money.
Right.
So yeah, sorry, I just went off, but yeah.
No, I hear where you're going and I appreciate it. I want to, you know, I want to be conscious of time and I want to take one more question that's coming in from an audience member. So I'll read it to you. The question is, how are the societal advantages to tenants and landlords any different than having the government simply buy properties and then rent them out for free?
Oh yeah, no, very good question. This is effectively the difference between Soviet Russia and this. This is a huge question. So if the government is buying it and then essentially just giving everybody you know, free rent everywhere, you've created a system where the government controls the entire market and you are highly susceptible to government corruption affecting building standards. You do not have the benefit of a free market. With this type of idea, the reason why the quality of housing improves is because if you make a better unit with better living accommodations, if you install hot tubs with Whirlpool instead of a bath that barely fits, someone will be willing to put 12 people in a house that normally fits 10 because those 12 people get a hot tub, right? So there is upward momentum towards building better because the people with the worst living accommodations will get emptied, and the people with better living accommodations will attract people at higher density because they'll be willing to live at higher density. Toronto, if it's attractive, you'll be willing to because of location. You're using market forces to incentivize the improvement of quality of life. And you don't need to force it. You don't have to have the government regulate itself. The market will simply do it out of sheer greed. This is a critical difference, and the importance of this being essentially, this is going to get fairly ideological, but just to put the point, this being effectively a capitalist system and not a atypical social communist style system. The whole model is predicated upon the idea that I'm going to build something better than you, and I'm going to take all your customers. And when you have businesses thinking that way, which is exactly the way that they love to think, it's better for the consumer, which in this case is paying the business through a designation of this is my address.
Right.
So it is fundamentally different from that, because the invisible hand of the market is fundamental to this. If you don't have that, it doesn't work. You have to allow the market to do what it does for the system to work. Otherwise, you have a race to the bottom, and we just try to cram people in boxes. Like, it just doesn't, like, you have to have the race to the top. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Right. And that makes a lot of sense. And it sort of leads to what I think maybe the last question coming in from an audience member, although we have more waiting, but the question that's being asked is, if you get the same amount for each person that you house, won't this still result in the most vulnerable being unhoused or underhoused? Because every landowner that's willing to house residents is still going to want the best residents with the best references. So what happens to the vulnerable? How do we ensure that they're taken care of? Because that's what would eliminate, the need for those social services we talked about.
So everyone has the same effective value in monetarily, not socially, because people are, would be lower, higher risk to your lawn being upkept or something. So the thing though is, there is going to be some landowner somewhere that is willing to house the incredibly vulnerable person who lives on the street of Toronto that hasn't had the basic human decency of a shower afforded to them in the last year, right? Like, there's someone who wants to collect the check, and you still have to meet building codes, you still have to meet fire codes, but there is somebody who wants to get paid. And because of that, there will be a place that they can live. And there is going to be somebody else who wants to create a slightly better accommodation to take those customers from them. Human greed. If you can make, if anyone can make, once again, you have to find the number, because if it's not a big enough number, people won't do it. But if you can make $10,000 a month housing 10 people who are living on the streets of Toronto, there is somebody who will find a way to make just a bit more money by taking them from you. And because they choose when they move, they have to entice them. Human greed. Someone wants to get paid.
Right. So this idea is that human greed can actually create a better, more just, equitable world where people, actually get the necessities that
you just have to incentivize them to want to get paid. The reason why homeless people don't have a home is because they can't pay for it. Like, fundamentally, there are other issues, of course, but fundamentally, that you can't meet the value proposition to the person who owns the property. If they're worth X amount of dollars and it's a sufficient value proposition, then congratulations. And somebody says, you know what? I think I can do this better than you. Maybe I'll give them a walk-up. Maybe I'll make sure that I have a ramp installed for people who, don't want to climb up stairs or might not be able to effectively easily. Oh, now I've attracted more people. Human greed. And I fundamentally believe, and I think that anyone who's worked in the private sector also fundamentally believes, that the one thing that is definitely true about the private sector is they love to beat their competitors at doing something where it's slightly better than what they can do. They beat you on price, they beat you on accommodations, beat you on something, but in this case, they can't beat you on price, so they have to beat you on quality. They don't have a choice.
Right.
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 So just anyways, and once again, I'm not saying we do this tomorrow. I'm saying we look into it more. I was very passionate and I wasn't being as academically careful as I normally am with my work. I'm just throwing an idea out here. Context, context, context. Okay. Just want to make sure we're good on that.
Well, listen, it's been a delight to have this conversation and to hear these ideas. And it might take, I think I'm kind of halfway sold on this is something to consider. We are out of time. Are there any sort of final thoughts or ideas that you want to leave our audience with before we wrap up?
How long do I have?
Huh. I don't know. No, people don't seem to be leaving. Maybe 2-3 minutes.
Okay, give me another question.
Another question. Okay, I need to
Just give me
get
that.
them.
We'll wrap up with that instead.
Okay. Let's talk about development, right? Kind of the impact on development, housing development. Yeah, what's the impact there?
Okay, so the majority, and this is one thing that people don't actually know, very, very commonly, the majority of the expenditure on housing development now is not actually on the building, it's on the cost of the land. The land value is actually the bulk of the expenditure. 50 years ago, the reverse was true. I heard this from a developer. I forget the exact number, but essentially, 50 years ago, it was 90-10, 90% cost of building, 10% land value. Now it's like 98-2, 98% cost of land, 2% development. The issue with development is not the building of the house, but it's land, and it's a separate issue entirely. We simply have a problem with the cost of land. They're separate issues. They affect each other in that they're both related, but they're separate. We have time for another one. Hit me.
Okay. This is one that I've been thinking about. Trailers, like trailer parks. Can would people just kind of, and you see this in Toronto, people putting up, tiny homes in their backyard too. We saw that. What about sort of these temporary low cost housing? And, is there any impact with that on this idea?
Is it property and can you register it?
Sure.
Pay me. No. And then look, if
Right.
you want to live in a trailer,
Right.
if you don't want to, like, open
Right.
market, can you register it? Pay me.
Right. Right.
Oh, let the market be the market. Okay. Like, seriously, if you flatten it and you allow the market to do what it does and you set a fair game, it can do this. But so often we don't do that. We don't make it fair. We pick winners and losers. No, let the market be greedy sharks that are trying to eat each other to the consumer's benefit. Okay, like,
Right.
Make it fair. Make it fair. And they'll do it because they want your money, which you're giving them from the government.
I hear you. I have 2 business degrees, and my business hat is going like, yeah, this makes sense. It didn't even take me till tomorrow. It makes sense, right?
Capitalism, like, exactly.
All right.
All right.
Okay, so we do need to wrap up, and we've already gone over time.
Thanks for
Alex,
having me.
thank you so much for being with us. This has been an absolute joy and honor to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Do what you got to do.
All right. Okay. So you can turn your camera off, and I'll just close up with some final remarks of what's coming next. Let me just flip it over to my other screen. So just to our audience, this has been just a fantastic conversation. It will be posted on our YouTube page, so feel free to share it widely. The York Alumni YouTube page is youtube.com/YorkU Alumni, and you can also watch any past lectures that you may have missed. For those of you who are still able to be on, we have one more poll question that will pop up. The question is, how would you rate your knowledge of today's topic following the discussion we've just had? It's popped up, so I'll give you a moment to answer. Wonderful, thank you so much. So in 2 weeks, join us for our next edition of Scholars Hub at Home. The topic is the 3 key puzzles of political trust with Carrie Wu, who's an assistant professor in our Department of Sociology within our Liberal Arts and Professional Studies faculty here at York, and is also the research chair in political sociology of health. To register for this event and to learn more about all of our upcoming activities and programs, please always feel free to visit our website, yorku.ca/alumni and friends. Thank you once again for choosing to be with us over this lunch hour. We appreciate your engagement and your questions and your thoughtfulness and your open minds, and look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great rest of your day.